The rain hammered against the stone courtyard of Windsor Castle that November morning. Sergeant James Whitmore stood at attention, his red ceremonial uniform soaked through, his bearskin hat dripping water down his collar. He had been a royal guard for 12 years. He had protected kings and queens. He had stood through ceremonies watched by millions, but nothing had prepared him what was about to happen. Behind the thick wooden doors, he could hear voices, sharp, tense. Someone was arguing. Then, silence. James kept his eyes forward, as protocol demanded. A guard never looks. A guard never moves. A guard never reacts. The door opened. A young girl stepped out first. Princess Charlotte. She was only 8 years old, wearing a navy coat and small leather shoes that clicked against the wet stone. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Behind her, a woman in a gray suit hurried out, phone pressed to her ear. Barely glancing at the child, James recognized her. Margaret Finch, Senior Palisade. Always in a rush. Always important. If you're drawn into this moment, stay with us. Subscribe now, because this story will change how you see royalty forever. Charlotte stopped walking. She stood in the center of the courtyard, rain soaking into her coat. Margaret was already 20 feet ahead, still on the phone, her heels echoing off the ancient walls. "Mrs. Finch," Charlotte called out. The woman didn't turn. "Mrs. Finch," the princess said again, louder this time. Margaret stopped. She turned slowly, irritation flickering across her face. "Yes, Your Royal Highness." Charlotte's voice was steady, calm, but there was something else beneath it. Something that made James's chest tighten even though he wasn't supposed to be listening. "You didn't acknowledge Sergeant Whitmore." Margaret blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Sergeant Whitmore," Charlotte repeated, glancing briefly at James. "You walked past him without acknowledgement. Protocol states that all senior staff must acknowledge the King's Guard when entering or exiting a secured royal space." The courtyard went silent, except for the rain. Margaret's face flushed. She glanced at James, then back at Charlotte. "Your Highness, I was on an urgent call with protocol doesn't stop for phone calls," Charlotte said quietly. "My father taught me that. He said the guards stand in the rain and the cold and the heat for us. The least we can do is see them." James felt something crack inside his chest. In 12 years, no one had ever said that. No one had ever stopped. Most royals nodded. Some smiled. But this was different. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at James, really looked at him for the first time. "My apologies, Sergeant Whitmore," she said stiffly. James didn't move. Didn't blink. Protocol. Charlotte stepped closer to him. The rain was coming down harder now, but she didn't seem to notice. She stopped directly in front of him, her small face tilted up to meet his gaze. "Sergeant Whitmore," she said softly, and then she did something that would be talked about in the palace for years to come. Asterisk. Charlotte raised her small hand to her forehead. A salute, crisp. Perfect. The kind of salute that takes military officers years to master. James's heart stopped. Guards don't break protocol. Ever. But in that moment, every rule he had learned, every regulation drilled into him at Sandhurst, melted away. His hand moved on its own. Slowly, deliberately, he returned the salute. Their eyes met. Hers were bright with something he couldn't name. Respect, maybe, or understanding. For 3 seconds, they held that position. A princess and a guard. Equal. Then Charlotte lowered her hand. She nodded once and turned away, walking toward the waiting car. Margaret Finch stood frozen, phone forgotten in her hand. Watching with an expression somewhere between shock and shame, the car door closed. The vehicle pulled away, tires hissing on wet pavement. And James was alone again in the rain. His hand was shaking. He couldn't remember the last time his hand had shaken. That evening, James sat in the guards' quarters, still in uniform, staring at the wall. His roommate, Corporal Davies, was talking about football scores, but the words were just noise. All James could see was Charlotte's face. That serious, determined expression, the way she had stood in the rain to defend him. "You all right, mate?" Davies asked. James blinked. "Yeah. Long day. Heard something happened in the east courtyard this morning? That true?" Word traveled fast in the palace. James shrugged. Nothing worth mentioning. But it was worth mentioning. It was worth everything. 3 days later, James received a summons. Not unusual, guards were often called for briefings or schedule changes. But when he arrived at the administrative office, found himself facing Colonel Ashford, head of the Royal Guard Regiment. The colonel's face was unreadable. "Sit down, Whitmore." James sat, his spine straight, his hands on his knees. "I've received a report," Ashford said slowly, "about an incident involving you and Her Royal Highness, Princess Charlotte." James's stomach dropped. He had broken protocol. He had returned a salute from someone who wasn't military. He had moved without orders. Any one of those infractions could end his career. "Sir, I can explain." Ashford held up a hand. "The report came from Princess Charlotte herself." James stopped breathing. The colonel opened a folder on his desk. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was careful, looping, the kind that comes from expensive schools and patient tutors. Ashford read aloud, "Dear Colonel Ashford, I am writing to commend Sergeant James Whitmore for his exceptional service and for teaching me an important lesson about respect and duty. When I saluted him, he taught me that honor goes both ways. That being royal means seeing the people who protect us. I believe he deserves recognition for his years of service and for the example he sets." The colonel looked up. "It's signed by the princess and countersigned by the Prince of Wales." James couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. "You're being awarded a commendation, Whitmore," Ashford said, "for exemplary conduct and for embodying the values of the Royal Guard." James managed to nod. "Thank you, sir." But as he left the office, letter clutched in his shaking hand, he realized something. The commendation didn't matter. The recognition didn't matter. What mattered was that a little girl in a rain-soaked coat had seen him. Really seen him. And she had reminded him why he wore the uniform in the first place. 2 weeks later, James was back on duty. Same courtyard, same rain. Same red uniform and bearskin hat, but something had changed. Palace staff, who used to rush past, now paused, nodded, made eye contact. Margaret Finch walked by that morning. She stopped 3 feet away. "Good morning, Sergeant Whitmore," she said clearly. James didn't move, didn't respond. Protocol. But inside, he smiled. Then he heard a sound. Small footsteps on stone. Asterisk Charlotte appeared from around the corner. Same navy coat. Same serious expression. But this time, she wasn't alone. Prince George walked beside her, his hand in hers. Behind them, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, followed at a distance. Watching, Charlotte stopped in front of James. She looked up at him with those bright, knowing eyes. "Good morning, Sergeant Whitmore," she said formally. Protocol said he couldn't respond. Protocol said he should remain still and silent. But Charlotte didn't seem to expect an answer. She was teaching her brother something. "George," she whispered, tugging his hand, "you have to acknowledge them. They stand here for hours protecting us. Father says we must always show respect." George, only 10 years old and usually shy in formal settings, looked up at James. The boy's face was uncertain. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand in a small, awkward salute. James felt that crack in his chest widen. Charlotte smiled. Not at James, she was still respecting protocol, but at her brother. "Perfect," she said softly. Catherine approached, her heels clicking softly. She placed a hand on each child's shoulder. For a moment, she looked at James. Really looked. Her expression held something that might have been gratitude. Or pride. Maybe both. "Come on," she said gently to the children. "We'll be late." They walked away. But Charlotte glanced back once. Just once. And in that glance, James understood something profound. She wasn't just a princess learning protocol. She was a child learning humanity. And somehow, on a rainy November morning, he had been part of that lesson. The months that followed were different. Word of Charlotte's letter had spread beyond the palace walls. A journalist had caught wind of the story. Not the details, those remained private, but enough to write a piece about the young princess who championed the often invisible palace staff. The article was titled, "The Future of Royalty: How Princess Charlotte is Changing Palace Culture." James didn't read it. He didn't need to. He lived it every day. Other guards started sharing their own stories. Times when Charlotte had waited in the cold until a ceremony ended so she could thank them. Moments when she'd reminded her siblings to hold doors for staff members. Small acts. Quiet acts. The kind that don't make headlines, but change everything. Corporal Davies cornered James one evening in the mess hall. "You started something, mate," he said, grinning. "The little princess has got the whole palace thinking differently." James shook his head. "I didn't start anything. She did, by correcting a staff member. That took courage. Took more than courage," James said quietly. "It took seeing past the uniform, past the protocol, seeing the person underneath." That night, lying in his narrow bed, James thought about his daughter. Emma was 7, 1 year younger than Charlotte. He hadn't seen Emma in 3 months. Duty kept him at Windsor most weeks. And his ex-wife had moved to Manchester after the divorce. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then typed a message. "Emma, I know it's late, but I wanted to tell you something. At work today, I met someone who reminded me what really matters. Not rules, not appearances, but seeing people, really seeing them. I'm sorry I haven't always seen you. I want to do better. I love you, Dad." He hit send before he could overthink it. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "I love you too, Daddy. Can I visit soon?" James closed his eyes. "Yes," he typed back. "Please." The next morning, James requested leave for the following month. Colonel Ashford approved it without question. Maybe he had read something in James's face. Maybe he understood that sometimes duty to country has to balance with duty to family. But before James could leave Windsor, he had one more shift. One more day in the rain and the cold, standing at attention in the east courtyard. The morning started normally. Rain, gray sky. The weight of the bearskin hat pressing down on his skull. Then, just before noon, a commotion inside the palace. Raised voices, running footsteps. The door burst open. A man James didn't recognize stumbled out, breathing hard, looking over his shoulder. He was dressed in maintenance coveralls, but something was wrong. His eyes were wild, desperate. Behind him, 2 security officers sprinted through the doorway. James's training kicked in instantly. The man wasn't supposed to be here. Wrong uniform. Wrong exit. Wrong everything. The man ran toward the side gate, slipping on wet stone. He fell hard, crying out. The security officers closed in, but James was closer. He moved without thinking, crossing the courtyard in 5 long strides. Placing himself between the man and the gate, "Stay down," James commanded, his voice cutting through the rain. The man looked up at him, panting. "Please, I just needed money. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. Stay down," James repeated. The security officers arrived, pulling the man to his feet, reading him his rights. One of them nodded at James. "Good catch, Sergeant." James returned to his post. His heart was hammering. But his face showed nothing. Protocol. Always protocol. Except his hand was shaking again. Later, he learned the full story. The man had been impersonating maintenance staff, trying to steal valuables from the palace. He had gotten past 2 checkpoints using a fake ID. He had been minutes away from entering the private family wing, where Charlotte had been having her morning lessons. That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what could have happened. About a desperate man and a curious little girl and how thin the line was between safety and disaster. He thought about his own daughter. About all the ways the world could hurt the people you love if you weren't paying attention. The next morning, his last shift before leave, James arrived at the courtyard early. The sun was actually shining rare for November in England. The stones were dry. His uniform felt lighter somehow. He took his position and waited. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door opened. Charlotte emerged with her tutor carrying a stack of books. She was laughing at something, her face bright with childish joy. When she saw James, she stopped laughing, composed herself. Became the princess again. She walked over slowly, her tutor hanging back. "Sergeant Whitmore," she said formally, "I heard what you did yesterday, stopping that man." James stared straight ahead, said nothing, but his throat was tight. Charlotte continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My mother told me you might have saved my life. Or my brother's. She said you didn't hesitate." Still James said nothing. Couldn't say anything. "I want you to know something," Charlotte said, even softer now. "When I saluted you that day in the rain, I did it because my father taught me to honor service. But now I understand it differently. You don't just serve the crown. You serve people. Real people with real lives. And that matters more than any protocol." She stepped back, cleared her throat, spoke in her formal voice again. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant." Then she did something that broke every rule in the book. She extended her small hand for a handshake. James looked down at that hand, at the little girl who had started a revolution with a simple act of respect, at the future queen who understood what so many never learned, that power means nothing without humanity. Slowly, carefully, James reached out. He shook her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "The honor is mine, Your Royal Highness," he said quietly. Charlotte smiled. Not the formal princess smile she wore for cameras. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. Then she turned and walked away, her tutor following, leaving James alone in the sunshine with the memory of a handshake that felt like a promise. That afternoon, James drove to Manchester. 5 hours in his old Ford, listening to the radio, watching the countryside roll past. He hadn't told Emma exactly when he'd arrive. Wanted it to be a surprise? He pulled up outside his ex-wife's house just as school was letting out. Emma came running down the sidewalk, backpack bouncing, pigtails flying. She saw the car, saw him standing beside it. She screamed. She crashed into him so hard he stumbled backward. He caught her, lifted her up, buried his face in her hair. She smelled like school lunch and strawberry shampoo and everything good in the world. "I missed you," he whispered. "I missed you more," she said fiercely. He set her down, knelt to her level, looked into her eyes, the same eyes that looked back at him in the mirror every morning. "I need to tell you something important." She nodded seriously, sensing the weight in his voice. "I've spent 12 years protecting people I barely know," James said. "Important people. Royal people. And I was proud of that. But I forgot to protect the most important person in my life. You." Emma's lip trembled. "You protect the princess." "I do. But you know what the princess taught me? That the people we love deserve the same dedication we give to duty. Maybe more." Emma threw her arms around his neck again. "Are you staying?" "For 2 whole weeks," James said. "And after that, I'm going to visit every weekend. No more excuses. No more missing your life." His ex-wife, Sarah, appeared in the doorway. Her expression was guarded, but when she saw Emma's face radiant with joy, something softened in her eyes. 2 weeks? She asked. James nodded. "I put in for regular leave rotation. Every weekend off. It's time I was a father, not just a soldier." Sarah's jaw tightened. For a moment, he thought she might cry. Instead, she nodded once. "Okay, that's good, James." Those 2 weeks changed everything. James took Emma to the park, helped with homework, made terrible pancakes that she pretended were delicious. He read her bedtime stories and listened to really listen when she talked about school, friends, the stray cat she'd been feeding behind the garage. One evening, Emma asked the question he'd been dreading. "Daddy, why did you leave?" They were sitting on the couch, a cartoon playing on mute. James took a breath. He could have lied, made excuses, blamed the job or the distance or 1,000 other things. Instead, he told the truth. "I thought my duty was more important than anything else," he said quietly. "I thought standing in the rain protecting strangers made me noble, made me matter. But I forgot that you needed protecting too. Not from danger, from loneliness. From feeling like you weren't enough to make me stay." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I wasn't important." James pulled her close. "You are the most important thing in my life. And I'm so sorry it took me this long to show you." She cried into his shoulder. He cried too, for the first time in years. And in that moment, James understood what Charlotte had really taught him. It wasn't about salutes or protocol or recognition. It was about seeing people, really seeing them. Before it was too late, when James returned to Windsor, something fundamental had shifted. He still wore the uniform, still stood at attention in the courtyard, still followed protocol to the letter, but he was different inside. Other guards noticed. Davies commented that James seemed lighter, more present. "Whatever happened in Manchester," he said, "it did you good." James just smiled. Some things were too precious to share. Then, on a cold December morning, 3 weeks before Christmas, Charlotte appeared in the courtyard again. This time she was with both brothers and her mother. They were dressed formally, royal engagement somewhere in London. The family walked past James's post. Charlotte paused, just for a heartbeat. She looked at him with those knowing eyes, and she smiled. Not the princess smile, the real one. James felt that crack in his chest, the one that had started with a rainy day and a brave little girl finally healed completely. That evening, he called Emma. "What are you doing for Christmas?" he asked. "Mum says we're staying home." "Why?" "I've arranged leave," James said. "The whole week. I was thinking, maybe we could go somewhere. Just the two of us. Your choice." Emma's squeal of delight nearly burst his eardrum. "Really? Anywhere?" "Anywhere you want." She was silent for a moment, thinking. "Then can we go ice skating? And drink hot chocolate? And look at Christmas lights?" "We can do all of that and more," James promised. "Daddy, yes. I'm really glad you came back." James closed his eyes. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Later that night, alone in his quarters, James pulled out a piece of paper. He wasn't much of a writer. His handwriting was messy, his words simple, but he needed to do this. "Dear Princess Charlotte," he wrote, "you probably don't remember the day and the rain. You were just correcting a protocol mistake. But you changed my life. You taught me that seeing people, really seeing them, is the most important duty any of us has. I thought I was protecting you, but you were protecting me. From becoming someone who cared more about rules than about love, thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Sergeant James Whitmore." He folded the letter carefully. Tomorrow, he would give it to Colonel Ashford to pass through official channels. It would be read and filed and probably forgotten. But it needed to be said. Because sometimes the smallest gestures, a salute in the rain, a hand extended. A moment of genuine recognition create ripples that change everything. Asterisk. Christmas came with snow, the first white Christmas Windsor had seen in years. The palace grounds transformed into something from a fairy tale, all glittering ice and pristine white. James wasn't there to see it. He was in Manchester, watching Emma's face light up as they glided clumsily around an outdoor ice rink, both falling more than skating, both laughing until their sides hurt. They drank hot chocolate so rich it felt like dessert. They walked through streets strung with thousands of lights. They bought a small Christmas tree from a corner lot and decorated it with ornaments Emma had made in school lopsided, stars and glittery angels, and one attempt at a snowman that looked more like a blob. It was perfect on Christmas morning. Emma opened her presents with the explosive joy only children possess. Books and art supplies and a new winter coat she'd been wanting. But when she opened James's final gift, a silver locket with their photo inside, she went very quiet. "Daddy," she whispered, "it's beautiful." "Open it," he said. Inside, opposite their photo, was an engraving. always seen, always loved. Emma looked up at him, confused. What does it mean? James knelt down. It means that no matter where I am or what I'm doing, I see you. Not just with my eyes, with my heart. You're not invisible to me. Not anymore. Not ever again. She understood. Children always understand the important things. She threw her arms around him and held on like she'd never let go, and James held her back, marveling at how close he'd come to losing this. How easy it would have been to keep choosing duty over love, protocol over presence, until one day he looked up and Emma was grown and gone, and all he had was an empty uniform and emptier arms. The months that followed settled into a new rhythm. James worked his shifts at Windsor, but every weekend he drove to Manchester. He attended Emma's school plays, helped with science projects, taught her to ride a bike without training wheels, running alongside her, catching her when she wobbled, cheering when she finally found her balance. He met her friends, learned their names, invited them over for Emma's birthday party, and made himself scarce while they giggled over secrets he'd never understand. He even really talked with. Sarah apologized for the years of absence. Disguised as duty, she didn't forgive him immediately, but she softened, started including him in decisions about Emma, started trusting him again. You're different, she said one evening when he dropped Emma off. What changed? James thought about the rain, about Charlotte's serious face, about the salute that had cracked open something he'd kept locked away for too long. I learned to see people, he said simply. Sarah nodded like she understood, even though she probably didn't. Not completely. But that was okay. Some lessons are too personal to fully share. Back at Windsor, James noticed changes spreading through the palace like gentle waves. More staff members greeted the guards. More royals paused to acknowledge them. Small gestures. Simple courtesies. But they accumulated into something that felt like respect. One afternoon in late spring, nearly 6 months after that rainy November morning, Colonel Ashford summoned James again. You're being promoted, Ashford said without preamble. Staff sergeant, and you're being assigned to train new recruits. You'll teach them protocol, discipline, all the usual. Ashford paused. But I want you to teach them something else too. Something about why we serve. Not just the crown. Not just the country. But the people behind the titles. James felt his throat tighten. Colonel, I don't know if I'm the right person. You're exactly the right person, Ashford interrupted. Because you learned it the hard way. And you didn't let it make you bitter. You let it make you better. So James became an instructor. He taught young men and women how to stand at attention, how to march in formation, how to wear the uniform with pride. But he also taught them about seeing, about recognizing the humanity in everyone. From the highest royal to the lowest stable hand. He told them about a princess who corrected a protocol mistake, about how one moment of genuine recognition can change a life. Some understood immediately. Others took longer, but they all left his training different than when they arrived. One cadet, barely 18, asked him after class, Sergeant, did that really happen? The salute? James nodded. Every word. What did it feel like? James considered the question. Like waking up, he said finally. Like realizing I'd been asleep for years and suddenly I could see clearly. The cadet nodded thoughtfully and walked away, and James hoped the lesson had landed. 2 years passed. Emma turned 10. She visited Windsor for the first time, eyes wide at the castle's grandeur. Nervous about meeting real royalty, even though James explained they probably wouldn't. But then, walking through the East Courtyard, the same courtyard where everything had changed, they encountered Charlotte. She was 13 now, taller, poised, every inch a princess. But when she saw James, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Sergeant Whitmore, she said formally. James came to attention. Your Royal Highness. Charlotte's gaze shifted to Emma. And who is this? My daughter, ma'am. Emma. Emma executed a wobbly curtsy she'd practiced 100 times that morning. Charlotte smiled, that real smile that James remembered from the rain. It's lovely to meet you, Emma. Your father is an exceptional soldier. Emma beamed. He's an exceptional dad, too. Charlotte's smile widened. I believe that. The best soldiers usually are. She nodded once more and walked away, security detail following. But before she disappeared around the corner, she glanced back, caught James's eye, and he knew she remembered. She remembered the rain and the salute and the moment when protocol gave way to something more important. Humanity. That night. Tucking Emma into the guest quarters bed, James asked her what she thought of the palace. It's beautiful, Emma said sleepily, but I like our home better. Why? Because you're there, she yawned. The princess was nice, though. She looked at you like you were friends. James smiled. Maybe we are. In a way, Emma's eyes drifted closed. Daddy, yes. Promise you'll never go back to how you were before. Before you learn to see people. James kissed her forehead. I promise. You meant it. Because Charlotte had taught him something that no amount of training ever could. That the most important battles aren't fought with weapons or strength. They're fought with recognition. With seeing people, really seeing them in a world that makes it too easy to look away. 3 months later, James received an invitation. The palace was hosting a ceremony honoring long-serving staff members. His name was on the list. He stood in the grand hall, wearing his dress uniform, surrounded by people who dedicated decades to service. The Prince of Wales gave a speech about duty and dedication. Then, one by one, they were called forward to receive commendations. When James's name was announced, he walked to the front. The prince shook his hand warmly. Thank you for your service, Staff Sergeant Whitmore, and thank you for teaching my daughter and all of us an important lesson. James nodded to move to speak. As he stepped back, he saw Charlotte standing with her brothers, watching. She caught his eye. And very slowly, very deliberately, she raised her hand in a salute. Just like that day in the rain. James's vision blurred. He returned the salute, protocol be damned, and saw her smile. Later, driving back to Manchester with the commendation on the passenger seat, James thought about journeys. About how the longest ones aren't measured in miles, but in moments. In tiny choices that accumulate into transformation. He'd started as a soldier who couldn't see past his duty. He'd become a father who understood that love was the greatest service of all. And it had all begun with a little girl in the rain. Brave enough to correct a mistake, wise enough to see what everyone else missed. A guard was more than a uniform. A person was more than a title. And being seen, really truly seen, was the most powerful gift anyone could give. James pulled into Sarah's driveway. Emma burst out the front door before he'd even turned off the engine. Daddy, you're home. Home, yes. That's exactly what this was. He scooped her up, and in that moment, everything was right. The rain was just a memory. The salute was just a story. But the lesson, the beautiful, life-changing lesson, was forever. Because in the end, we're all standing in the rain, hoping someone will stop and see us. And when they do, when they really do, everything changes. Everything.